Hello again. So you'd like to know what the arm should be doing in the downswing? Come back in just a moment and I'll show you. Hello again. So it's a tricky one today. What do the arms and hands actually do in the downswing? I think there's an awful lot of misunderstanding about this. Some people are out there saying, they shouldn't be doing anything. Other people are out there saying basically it's the most important part of the golf swing. And the truth probably lies somewhere in between. Most certainly you're going to need your arms to hit the golf ball any kind of a distance. If your arms are going to be totally passive and just staying in front of the center of your chest, then that's going to be fine to chip and maybe even pitch a ball. But if you're wanting any kind of distance, you're going to need the extra levers that your arms actually create for you. The big trick is basically keeping the club moving in plane during the golf swing and getting the club face obviously back square onto the golf ball. So the idea of this video is just to give you an idea of how you should do that and what you should be practicing to do that. And in coming videos, I'll also give you an idea of how to kind of time the sequence between all of your different body parts. But primarily what you've got to understand that the arms and hands are going to be struggling if your shoulders and your hips aren't doing the right thing in the first place. So I'll leave a link up here if you haven't seen my videos on the hip movement and on the shoulder movement. But basically, if the shoulders are moving on plane, that means that they're moving in the same angle as the golf club had at the address, then you've got more chance of them pulling the arms up and down in the same plane as they were at the beginning. But the arms obviously are going to have to support that plane, and they're also going to have to help to accelerate the golf club. So learning by doing, let's just get in there and do it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand in front of or inside the explaner a little differently than I normally would. Usually the explaner is made so you would stand with your chest in the middle and then you'd swing the club up and down around while standing in the explaner. I've got actually explaner set up on the shaft plane. So that means that it's as though I would take the club in my hand here, and you can see that my upper body is kind of pointing through the middle of the explaner. What does that mean in the golf swing? It means basically that when I start the backswing, if I start back here, the upper body will just turn and move the club almost, the feeling to this camera, straight back in plane, and as far as this camera is to right side. And then as my hips start to turn and I start to hinge, then the hinging of the arm actually lifts the club up, and you're swinging on almost a kind of parallel plane to the original shaft plane. And the folding of the right elbow and wrist, the rotation in the shoulders, is lifting the left arm up to the chin and getting you up here more or less with the arm across your shoulders. And if your shoulders are still in plane, then you're good to go for the downswing. Now, at the start of the downswing, the arms shouldn't really be doing anything. On the contrary, if you see a lot of kind of the top golfers, they've not quite got to the top of the backswing with their arms, and their hips and their legs are starting to actually work. So that means they've actually changed in that. You can actually see that that might actually have the effect on the golf club that will kind of flatten out. It'll definitely give you a little bit more wrist angle and a little bit more elbow angle. What then tends to happen is the swing goes wrong. So either people start moving out of their shoulder, they start accelerating with their arms, even to a certain extent letting this kind of right hip come forward, and everything goes very pear-shaped. And really at this position in the golf swing, you've got to get a little bit more passive really with your body movement, your upper body movement at any rate, and get a little bit more active with your arms. That means that once I'm actually at the top of the golf swing, what I want to do is kind of get the thing back down. So the left arm, if you remember, has been lifted up, and I want to bring that back down. Now I'm going to do that by pulling the left arm down, but also pushing the club down with the right arm. In fact, I find it's easier to think about what the right arm's doing than what the left arm's doing. So when I actually start the downswing, what I'm trying to do is actually sink the right elbow. So if you've actually got to a point where your arms are a little bit above the perfect plane line, you'll actually see in the backswing that the right elbow is above the line of the shaft. That will actually return and then slide down the line of the shaft. At the same time, your lower arm is being sunken so that when it gets to roundabout across from the right hip, the lower arm is actually parallel to the original shaft plane and slightly ahead of it. So I'm not back exactly here on the plane, I'm slightly over the top of the plane. And this is really all part and parcel of the movement. The club will be dragged a little bit behind you. You're keeping this wrist angle, but the right elbow and shoulder angle has been brought back down, and I've got the club virtually just before impact here. At this point, my hips will have come back to the starting position, and with the really flexible golfers actually open slightly. You see this with the majority of tour players. The left shoulder, on the contrary, has actually stayed, at least in my feeling, still rotated, and its tops at this point is probably parallel. My shoulders are parallel to the target. And then I start turning actively with my upper body to the target, and as hard as I can. And by doing that, the left hand is being pulled up as the right arm is being straightened. And their arms are being pulled around the explanar point, or the shaft plane, before pulling me up into the end position. And that's more or less all there is to it. Or is it? Well, yes and no. What I want to do again is run through that once more time without the golf club, because I think, although you might have understood this, it's going to be a little bit simpler if there's no golf club there. If I take the address position again, what I'm actually starting to do, I'm just going to move my arms and hands back with my shoulders, and then as the hips turn, I'm folding the right elbow and the right wrist, which is actually lifting the club up. When I get to the top of the golf swing, my hips will start to turn, and I'm driving down with my arms, actively moving my arms back down. And while I'm doing this, I do not have the feeling that the shoulders are opening. However, the right shoulder is coming down. In fact, it's actually led the start of the downswing. So I should have the feeling, if my right elbow was on the shaft plane at the top of the swing, that it's almost kind of sliding down the shaft plane as the angle between the upper arm and the body closes. At the same time, the wrist is moving down to get the lower arm back on plane, but the actual club and the hand is still behind. And it's the club and the hand which is going to actually give you this catapult effect when you release through the golf ball. So it's imperative that you keeping that angle. That will be held usually by the inertia of the golf club, because the rotation and the forces moving down will have equal and opposite forces moving up on the golf club. So I'll have the feeling almost of what they call pressure on the club, as if I'm pushing down into this position. And you can see here in the right camera that the lower arm is now parallel, and in the front camera that I've got basically the hand still bent back. At this point in time, you see the left shoulder is still, in my feeling, quite far forward, and my hips are slightly open to the target line. How far open to the target line will depend on how flexible you are, and will also depend on whether you can actually get the arm even further forward, even closer to the starting position that it was. But again, I think if you can get it kind of down by kind of the right thigh level, you're doing really, really well. From here, there's a change in feeling in that you're going to be rotating hard with your body now. The upper body is clearing. And the reason for that is that this is basically the lowest point in the golf swing for your hands. If you can get your hands into the lowest point here, then from here on, as the upper body turns and the left shoulder goes up, you're pulling the left arm up. And pulling the left arm up will cause the club to start to release. It's a little bit kind of a working of physics. If you can get that club going up and away from the target, so back around your body, the club head is going to be released down. So in this position, I'm rotating. You can see that if that's the lowest point, the hands are actually being pulled up, whereas the club head is being pulled down. And this is all happening really in milliseconds. But my feeling is that I've almost stayed passive with my upper body while being active with my arms and my hips. And then as my shoulders and lower body really extend the rotation, I'm allowing this release to happen and letting the club being catapulted forward. At this point, usually you'll see that the club will toe down and your hands will come up above the original shaft plane. Some of the best strikers of a golf ball actually manage to get their hands down on the right thing, which basically means kind of pushing the arms really down into their original position. Again, this is really the few really talented guys who get down into that position. Some people will kind of cheat a little and go down in their knees, but the majority of good players, when they actually get to this position, are actually pushing away from the ground with their feet to accelerate the club even further. Remember, the more that this club comes up at the end, the more and the quicker it's going to go down at the front. It's also extremely important with the arm swing now to remember that the arms are not moving out, or the hands are not moving out to the target. On the contrary, you want the feeling of pulling them around the shaft plane, and here the explaner is a perfect example of how the clubs and hands actually move to the inside. So your right arm is actually going to find full extension at around about kind of 45 degrees, maybe a little bit more, depending again on the flexibility of your upper body. And then the club is actually going to be the fastest moving part, and that will overtake, causing your lower arms to rotate, and it will pull you, if you allow it, around. And I like to have the feeling then of the kind of the right heel coming off the ground, my upper body standing up, and the club just basically coming around the back of my neck. And that's really the position that you see everybody kind of posing in at the end of a golf swing. The main problem that you're going to have here is basically teaching the arms to do this. So if you want a little drill just to get you going, I'll come back with a couple more in the very near future. You put your right hand or your left hand and wrist on top of your right wrist, and then start the backswing with your shoulders. Allow the hips to turn and the arms to come up, and the arms should be moving up above the original shaft plane. Then as you start the downswing, you're driving down with your right arm, allowing the right elbow to slide down the shaft plane to get the lower arm parallel to its original shaft plane, but the wrist is still bent back. Your left arm has the feeling of pulling down and into the body to get you low enough to actually get onto this plane again. And at this position, the upper body really starts rotating very quickly, which will pull the club up at the butt end and make it release down into the golf ball. Your right arm is straightening, pushing the club away from you, and your left arm is also leaving the side of your chest here, but it's moving to the inside. It's not going out along the target line, it's coming inside and around the explaner line here of the shaft plane. And at this position where your arms are straight, your chest has really stopped rotating, the arms will rotate, the club overtakes your hands, and you just allow it to come around by lifting your heel and getting into that end position. And that's more or less where you ought to be at the end of a golf swing. So if you've understood all that, then you're probably better than 90% of the guys playing in this game. I hope you have. As ever, if you like the video, please hit the like button. If you love the video, subscribe. I'm going to leave my philosophy on golf up here in the left corner. Look forward to seeing you all next time, and I'll be back with a few more tips about how to actually get that working in conjunction with your hips and your shoulder turn. See you next time. Bye-bye.